The scrubs came down the chute already wet, and the water was cold the way the ocean is cold, not the way a tap is cold, and there is no ocean within 1,000 miles of St. Louis. I want to start there because that's where it started for me, and because if I explain everything first, you won't believe the part that matters. So just sit with it a second. A blue scrub top, size medium, hospital issue, sliding out of the laundry chute soaked through and heavy, and when I brought it to my face, I don't know why I did that. You don't usually smell the laundry. It smelled like salt and cold stone and something green underneath, like the inside of a shell. The tag stitched into the collar said 4 West, room 412. 20 minutes later, the code alarm went off on 4 West. A man in 412. His heart stopped for 4 minutes on a Tuesday in a building 40 feet above the Mississippi. And I was standing in a basement laundry room holding the proof of it before it happened. Cold seawater running off my elbows onto the floor. I run the overnight shift in the laundry. That's the whole of me. That's my job. I'm not a nurse or a mystic or anybody who's supposed to know things. I sort and wash and fold and load the carts that go back up in the service elevator before the day people arrive. I took the graveyard because it's quiet, and because I don't do well around other people anymore. And because my mother is a patient 4 floors up, and working nights meant I could be in the same building as her, without having to sit in a chair and watch her not know who I am. There was one rule the man who trained me gave me, my first week, and I didn't understand it, and I wish to God I had. He said it the way you'd mention a quirk of the machines. If one comes down wet, cold wash it, fold it, log it, and put it back on the cart. Don't wring it out. Whatever you do, don't wring it out. I need to back up. My name doesn't matter much. What matters is that I'm 52. I grew up in a town on a lake in southern Missouri. And when I was 15, my brother Danny drowned in that lake while I was supposed to be watching him. He was 8. It was July. I was 15 and I was talking to a boy on the dock, and I looked up and the water was just water, flat and bright and empty, and it stayed empty for the rest of my life. They found him that evening. My mother never said it was my fault. She didn't have to. There are things a mother's face says that her mouth never will, and I read that face for 37 years, and then her mind started to go and the face stopped saying anything at all, which was somehow worse. So that's the shape of me. A woman who has spent her whole life not looking at water, who moved to a landlocked city on purpose, who took a job in a basement where the only water is the kind that comes out of a machine, warm and soapy and safe. You understand now why the seawater meant something to me before I knew what it meant. It found the one thing I'd spent my life running from, and it put it in my hands, cold and heavy and smelling like the last good afternoon of my childhood. The man who trained me was named Gil. He'd run that laundry for 26 years and he was retiring, and I was his replacement. And for 2 weeks he taught me the machines and the sorting in the carts, and somewhere in there he taught me the other thing without ever quite saying what it was. Gil was a big, slow, quiet man who moved like his knees hurt, which they did. He didn't talk much, but he watched the chute. I noticed that early. He'd be folding, hands going automatic, and his eyes would drift up to the mouth of the laundry chute every couple of minutes, checking it. The way you check a door you weren't sure you'd locked. I thought it was a habit. It was a vigil. I just didn't know that yet. The first wet one came down on my 9th night, the one from 412, and I did what anybody would do. I ran up the back stairs with it, some animal part of me sure that a soaking wet scrub meant a patient in trouble. A spill, a fall, something. That's when the code alarm went. I stood in the 4 West stairwell with a wet shirt in my hands and listened to them work on a stranger through the doors. And when it was over, when the intercom went quiet and a nurse came out into the hall with that particular loose walk people have after they've pulled someone back from the edge, I went back downstairs and I called Gil at home. It was 2 in the morning. He answered on the first ring, like he'd been sitting up. I told him what happened. There was a long silence on the line. Then he said, "Did you wring it out?" "What?" "The shirt. Did you twist the water out of it?" I said no. I said I'd just held it. And he let out a breath slow and he said, "Good." "Okay, good." And then he told me to cold wash it, fold it, put it back on the cart, and write it in the book. I asked what book. He said there was a logbook, green cover, on the shelf above the folding table, behind the bleach. He said, write the date, the room, and whether it was just wet or wet with sand. That's all. I'll come in and show you the rest. I want to tell you I demanded answers. I didn't. Because some part of me had already understood, standing in that stairwell, that I had been handed a thing that operated by rules older than the hospital. And you don't demand answers from a thing like that. You learn the rules, and you keep your head down, and you try to be one of the ones who gets to retire. I found the green book. It went back decades. Different handwriting in different eras, ballpoint and pencil, and one long stretch and fountain pen that had feathered brown with age. Dates, room numbers, and a third column mostly blank, but every so often filled in with a single word. And the word was always the same: sand. The dates with sand next to them had a second mark too. A small cross, drawn by hand, next to the room number. I didn't need Gil to tell me what the cross meant. I sat on an upturned laundry cart in the fluorescent hum at 3 in the morning, and I read 40 years of that book. And I understood the pattern the way you understand bad news from the sound of someone's footsteps before they've said a word. A wet scrub meant a patient was going to code, was going under. The laundry knew before the floor did, always by 15-20 minutes, sometimes more. The water came down first, and then, upstairs, a heart would stop. Most of them came back. Most of the entries in the book were just wet. Just a room and a date. No cross. Those were the ones they shocked back, the ones who surfaced, who woke up 2 days later confused and alive, and never knew that 4 floors down their shirt had wept cold salt water into a basement drain while they were gone. But the ones marked sand never came back. Gil came in the next night, on his own time, in his street clothes, and he showed me the rest. And this is where you're going to start deciding whether I'm crazy. That's fine. Decide the same thing. I only ask that you remember I didn't want any of this to be true. I had spent my life arranging things so it couldn't be true. Water was the enemy, and I had moved to the middle of the continent to get away from it. And it had followed me down a laundry chute anyway. Gil took me to the far corner of the laundry, past the big machines, to a door I'd assumed was a supply closet. It wasn't. It was a stairwell going down. Sublevel B. He didn't open it. He just put his hand flat on the door and he said, "You feel that?" The door was cold, cold like the wet shirts. And when I stood close to it and got quiet, under the hum of the machines and the building's blood rush of pipes, I could hear something on the other side of that door and down those stairs that had no business being in a basement in Missouri. I could hear surf, waves, the long draw and hush of water against a shore, patient, endless, coming from somewhere below the lowest floor of a hospital that sat on bedrock above a river. "Don't ever go down there," Gil said. He wasn't dramatic about it. He said it like a man telling you which outlet trips the breaker. The water comes up as far as the drain in the floor, back by the sorting table. That's as far as it's supposed to come. The wet ones. That's the water reaching up to let you know it's working. You cold wash them so you don't warm them. You fold them. You send them back up. And you don't wring them out, because wringing one out is like... He stopped, looked for the word. It's like answering. It's you reaching back. You do that, the water learns your name. I asked him the thing you're asking right now. I asked what it was, where the water came from. Why here? He said he didn't know, and I believed him, because a man who'd made his peace with a thing for 26 years had clearly stopped needing to understand it, the way you stop needing to understand a chronic pain, and just learned to live around it. But he told me the one thing he'd figured out, the thing he wanted me to have. It takes the ones who are already leaving, he said. That was most of what I ever got out of him. When I pushed what it was, why here, what the sand meant, he'd go quiet and let his eyes drift up to the chute. Once, only once, he said, "You'll try to save one. Everybody does. The first bad one that's yours. You'll try." His jaw worked like there was more behind his teeth. There was. But he swallowed it and picked up a folded sheet and said, "You can't pull them back. All you can do is teach it your name." He wouldn't say the rest. I didn't understand why a man would guard a silence that hard, until much later, when I found out what the water had already taken from him. Then he retired, and shook my hand, and told me I was good and steady. And he left, and I never saw him again. I heard he'd moved to Arizona. Uma, somebody said. down in the dry corner of the state, about as far from any coast as a man can get in this country. At the time I thought it was just an old man wanting the sun on his bad knees. It was a month before I understood. I was reading back through the green book on a slow night, further than I'd ever gone, into the fountain pen years, and I found an entry in Gill's blocky hand from 18 years back. A room number. And in the third column, where the word should have been sand, there was a name instead. A woman's name. Carol. No cross beside it. Just one line, pressed so hard the nib had torn through the paper in 2 places. Went down. She wasn't there to be saved. She was there to stay. God help me, I almost stayed with her. Gill had a wife once. The old-timers on the loading dock remembered her. A long illness, a bed on an upper floor, and she'd passed the same year Gill went quiet and strange. The year he quit taking vacations and started sleeping in a chair beside the laundry chute. He'd gone down those stairs for her. He'd reached into the green for the one it had already decided to keep, and it didn't give her back. And the only thing Gill carried up out of that water was his own name, written after that in damp cuffs, and the smell of a shore that walked behind him wherever he went. That was why he ran to the driest place in America, not to rest, to put 1,000 miles of desert between himself and any water low enough for the tide to reach up through and finish collecting what he owed it. I filed it away as a warning. I even believed I'd heed it. I want that on the record, that Gill's home-ruined life was a note left for me, the same as the Green Book was, and that when my turn came I read the warning clear as morning, and did the exact opposite. For a while it was almost okay. That's the part people don't expect. You'd think living with a thing like that would be constant terror, but it isn't. It's a job, and the human animal can turn nearly anything into a job. Most nights, nothing. Weeks would go by with dry laundry and quiet machines. Then a wet one would come down and my stomach would drop and I'd cold wash it and fold it and write it in the Green Book. 4 West 419. Wet. And upstairs a code would run and, most times, a stranger would live. And I'd feel this strange second-hand relief, like I'd been let in on a secret mercy. I started to think of myself as a kind of witness. Somebody had to know. Somebody in that building had to hold the knowledge that the dying went somewhere, went under and came back, and that the somewhere had a shore. I got 2 sand ones in my first year, both elderly. Both on the palliative floor, patients who were already dying, already in that soft morphine country between here and gone. When the sand came down I logged it and drew the little cross before it happened, and both times, within the hour, they were gone. I told myself it was mercy. Maybe it was. The sea is only cruel if you're not ready for it, and those 2 had been ready a long time. There was one nurse who nearly made me tell. Priya, on 4 West, nights like me. She was the one who'd come out of 412 with that loose walk on my 9th night. Sometimes we'd cross at the vending machines at 4 in the morning when neither of us could stand the quiet any longer. One of those nights, months in, she was stirring a bad hot chocolate with a coffee stirrer, and she said, out of nowhere, "You ever notice the ones we bring back all say the same thing?" I asked what thing. She said the coded patients, the ones whose hearts they restarted. A lot of them woke up describing the same place. Not a white light, not a tunnel, cold water, a green glow under the surface, a shore they couldn't quite swim to. And here's the part I don't put in the chart, she said, dropping her voice like the machine might be listening. 2 of them, separate people, months apart, asked me who the boy was. The little boy out in the water, just under, watching them. They both said he wasn't frightening. They said he looked like he was waiting on somebody. She laughed, embarrassed, and said it was probably just the brain starved of oxygen, throwing its last party. I said probably. I did not tell her that I knew the boy's name. I did not tell her that I had been waiting on somebody for 37 years myself, and that I was beginning to be afraid the boy and I were waiting on each other. I went back down to my basement and I didn't sleep. And after that I stopped meeting Priya at the machines. Some conversations you can't have twice and come back up from. I never told anyone. Who would I tell? The nurses upstairs would have had me in a psych eval by dawn. I did the only thing that felt like something. On nights I got a wet one from a floor near my mother's, I'd go up the back stairs afterward and stand outside her room and watch her sleep through the little window in the door, just to be sure the water hadn't been reaching for her. I have to tell you about my mother now, because everything after this is about her. And you can't understand the choice I made if you don't understand what she was to me, what we were to each other, which was broken, which was two people who loved each other across a distance neither of us knew how to cross. And the distance was the exact shape of an 8-year-old boy. And it had been there so long we'd built our whole relationship out of not mentioning it. She had a bad heart, and a mind that was coming apart like wet paper. Some days she knew me. Most days she thought I was a nurse, or her sister, or nobody. The cruel thing about her particular decline was that the recent memories went first, so I disappeared. But the old ones stayed sharp, which meant that some nights I'd come to the window, and she'd be awake and talking. And she'd be talking to Danny, telling him supper was ready, asking him to bring in his shoes. Her face when she talked to him was open and easy in a way it had never once been when she talked to me. She had 37 years of grief, and somewhere in the ruin of her mind she'd set it down, and she'd gone back to before, to the kitchen, and the lake and her boy tracking sand across the floor. And I stood in the hall on the other side of a door and watched my mother be happy in a summer that had killed us both. And I couldn't go in, because if I went in I'd be the nurse, or the sister, or nobody, and the summer would end. And I couldn't do that to her, so I watched. That was the closest we got. A pane of glass and a boy who wasn't there. I never got to say the thing. That's my wound if you want it plain. I never once got to say I'm sorry I looked away. I never stopped looking for him. I've been 15 years old on a dock for 37 years. And now the person I needed to say it to was gone, even while she was still breathing. And I'd made my peace with the fact that I would never get to say it. I'd built a whole quiet life on that peace. Basement, night shift, glass door, distance. Then, on a night in October, a wet scrub came down the chute, and I brought it to my face out of the habit I'd built, and it smelled like salt and green and cold stone. And the tag said 7 East, room 731, my mother's room, and there was sand in the pocket. I want to be honest about what I did, because I broke every rule Gil gave me, one after another, and I'd do it again. And that's the part that should frighten you more than the water, because the rules weren't the danger. I was the danger. The water only ever offered. I'm the one who reached. The first thing I did was ring it out. I heard Gil's voice even as I did it. Don't answer. Don't reach back. Don't let it learn your name. And I twisted that shirt in my 2 hands until the cold water ran down my wrists and spattered on the concrete. And I did it on purpose, because I wanted the water to know I was here. I wanted it to look at me. If it was going to take my mother, I wanted it to have to go through the person who'd been standing on the dock. Finally, 37 years too late. Finally looking at the water instead of away. Then I went to the door to sublevel B, and I opened it, and I went down toward the sound of the sea. The stairs went down farther than a basement should. The air got colder and wetter, and the surf got louder, and the concrete gave way to older stone, wet and dark and furred with something soft. And then the stairs ended at water, just water. A black tide filling the bottom of a stairwell under a hospital, lapping at the steps, stretching back into a dark that was much too big to fit inside a building. A dark with a horizon in it, with a far-off pale line of waves breaking somewhere out in a place that could not exist. It smelled like my whole childhood. It smelled like July. The water was very cold and very still near the steps, and it was clear. And there was light in it from nowhere. That green underwater light, and I could see down into it. And there were people down there. Not drowned people. That's what I have to make you understand. They weren't corpses. They were just under. Floating easy, eyes open, calm, at rest. Turning slowly in the current with their hair drifting around their faces. And they weren't struggling. They weren't afraid. They looked the way you look in the last moment before sleep takes you. And there were so many of them, going down and down into the green until the green went black. More than a hospital could ever have lost. More than a city, a whole ocean of the quietly kept. And they were not all floating. Deeper, where the green went dim, one of them was walking, upright, unhurried. A woman in a hospital gown crossing the floor of the sea on bare feet. Her gown swaying around her legs, her hair standing straight up off her scalp in the water. Moving away from me into the far dark, with the patience of a person who has all the time there is. She never once looked back. And while I watched her go, every floating face in that green, the dozens, the hundreds, all at once together, without a sound, rolled their eyes up and open, and turned them on me, not reaching, not calling, just looking, the way a whole dark room of sleepers might turn as one toward the single person still awake. And close, just under the surface, close enough to touch, was Danny. 8 years old, exactly, not a day older than the July I lost him. His hair moving in the water, his eyes open and calm, looking up at me the way he used to look up at me when he wanted me to carry him even though he was getting too big. That trusting upward tilt of a little kid's face. 37 years and the sea had not aged him 1 hour. It had kept him perfectly, gently, the way you keep something precious. And I understood in that moment that he had not suffered, that whatever I had imagined in 37 years of nightmares was wrong, that the water was not cruel, that my brother had been resting in this green quiet the entire time I'd been drowning up in the dry world above. I got down on the wet stone and I put my hand in the water. It was so cold it burned. I said his name. I hadn't said his name out loud in years. I couldn't, it was a stone I couldn't lift. But I said it there, into the water, Danny, and his eyes moved to me, and something in his small, calm face changed. A kind of recognition, a kind of waiting for you that broke something in my chest, that had been holding for 37 years. And I understood the offer. Nobody spoke it. The water doesn't speak. But I understood it the way you understand everything down there, in your body, before your head can argue. My mother was in the water too, somewhere, being drawn down into the green. I could feel her going. The sand in the pocket meant the sea had decided to keep her. But the sea takes what's leaving, and it will make a trade for what isn't. I could pull her back. I could reach into that green and pull my mother up into the dry world for a little longer. But the water wanted someone who was already halfway gone, someone who'd been leaving their own life for a long, long time. And I had been leaving mine since I was 15 years old on a dock, and we both knew it, the water and I. I could trade myself. I could go under, into the green quiet, and be with Danny, and rest, and stop, finally stop, after 37 years of standing on that dock. And my mother would go back up and live out her last little while in her happy ruined summer. I'm not going to pretend I didn't want it. God forgive me, I wanted it. I was so tired. Danny was right there, and he wasn't cold, and he wasn't afraid, and he'd been waiting. And all I had to do was lean in, and the water would take the trade and it would be over. The dock, the glass door, the distance, all of it, over, and I would finally have carried him the way he'd wanted me to carry him. Down into the quiet, together. I had my face almost to the water. I could feel the cold coming off it. Danny's hand was drifting up toward mine. And I thought about my mother in her bed talking to a boy who wasn't there. Happy. Set free of her grief in the last place her mind could reach. And I thought, she doesn't get to lose another child to this water. She doesn't get to spend her last weeks calling Danny's name in a kitchen that never ends, only to have the water take her daughter too, quietly, in a basement. No body, no answer, just gone, the way it took him. So she'd have two of us under the flat, bright surface, and nobody left up top to stand on the dock and be sorry. I stopped running. That was the whole thing. After 37 years, at the edge of the water, with my dead brother's hand rising toward mine, I did the one thing I had never done. I didn't go in. I said out loud to Danny, the thing I'd never gotten to say to anyone. I said, I'm sorry. I looked away for 1 second, and I have been looking back at that second for my whole life. I never stopped looking for you. I'm so sorry, and I have to go, because Mom needs me up there, and I can't leave her the way I left you. And I told my baby brother goodbye, and I told him I loved him, and I told him he could rest, that I was going to try to learn how to rest too, up in the dry world, where I still had a little living left to do. His hand stopped rising. His face, I'll see it every day for the rest of my life. His face didn't crumple, didn't grieve. It eased, like a child finally allowed to sleep. And I understood that the anger and the punishment and the drowning had never been in the water at all. It had all been in me. Danny had never blamed me. Only I had. The sea had just been holding him patient all these years, waiting for me to come down and set us both loose. I reached into the green with both arms, past Danny, down to where I could feel my mother going, and I pulled. It was like pulling against the whole ocean. My shoulders screamed. The cold went into my bones and stayed there. My hands have never been fully warm since that night. I want you to know that there's a cold that lives in them now. But I pulled, and something gave, and I fell back onto the wet stone with my arms empty, and the water suddenly just water, dark and still and ordinary, no light in it, no faces, no boy, only the smell of salt already fading. Upstairs, at that exact minute, I checked the time later against the code log. My mother's heart, which had stopped, started again on its own, before the crash team even reached her. The nurse's note said spontaneous return of circulation. Unexplained. She stabilized. She came back up. I sat in that stairwell until my legs would hold me, and then I climbed back up into the dry hum of the laundry, and I cold washed my own soaked sleeves in the utility sink, and I did not write anything in the green book, because there was no column for what had happened, and I went up the back stairs to 7 East, and I stood at the little window in my mother's door. She was awake, and she was looking right at the door, right at me, and for the first time in 2 years her eyes were clear. That terrible temporary clarity that sometimes surfaces in people whose minds are going, like a swimmer breaking water for one breath. She looked at me through the glass and she knew me. I could see that she knew me. And she smiled and she mouthed something I couldn't hear through the door, and I pushed it open and went to her. And she took my cold hand in her warm one, and she said, "He's not cold anymore. That's all. He's not cold anymore." And then the clarity went back under, and she asked me if I'd seen her son. Supper was getting cold, and I said, "Yes, Mama, I saw him. He's fine, he's warm, he's resting." And she nodded and closed her eyes, easy, and slept. She lived 11 more days. They were good days. I took my vacation, all of it, years of it saved up in a basement, and I sat with her every one of those 11 days, and mostly she didn't know me, but it didn't matter anymore, because I finally knew myself. I'd set the stone down at the bottom of the sea. Whoever I was after that could sit in a chair and hold a dying woman's hand and not need her to know it was her daughter. That was enough. It was 37 years more than I thought I'd ever get. She passed on a Sunday morning, in daylight, with the sun coming through the window. No code, no alarm, no crash team. Her heart just slowed and stopped, gentle, the way a boat drifts to a stop when you cut the engine. I was holding her hand. I felt her go. I was back on shift the following Tuesday, because grief and a mortgage don't take turns. And that night her scrubs came down the chute, her hospital gown, her linens, from room 731. The last of her processed and sent down to me to wash like everything else in that building. Eventually comes down to the person in the basement. They were dry. I have to tell you what that meant, because you'd have to have lived with the Green Book to understand. In all my time down there, in 40 years of that logbook, no scrub from a patient who died ever came down dry. The dying ones came down wet. Always. The water reached up for every single one, dipped them, kept some, let others surface. But my mother's came down dry, and warm, room warm, ordinary. The most ordinary laundry in the world. And I stood there holding my dead mother's dry gown, and I understood that the water hadn't taken her. She hadn't gone under. Whatever I'd done at the bottom of those stairs, I'd bought her a clean exit, a dry death, a walk out the front door of her life in the daylight instead of a drowning in the dark. She hadn't gone to the green. She'd gone somewhere else, somewhere I couldn't see, somewhere I have to hope is warm. And Danny, I have to believe Danny went with her, that I let him loose and he found his way to wherever she was going, and that they're not in the cold anymore, either of them. That they went up into the light instead of down into the green. I folded her gown. I held it a long time. And then I did the thing you're supposed to do. I put it on the cart to go back up, and I reached for the green book to write the last entry. 731. Dry. The only dry one in 40 years. And that's when I noticed my own uniform. I keep a spare on a hook by the sorting table. My laundry room uniform, the one I wear every night. It had been dry when I hung it up at the start of the shift. It wasn't dry now. And there was something else. Something I made myself look at slowly, the way you make yourself look at a wound. On the concrete, leading from the floor drain by the sorting table to the hook where my uniform hung, there were footprints. Wet, bare, small. A child's or a woman's narrow foot, pressed in seawater that had not been there when my shift began. They came up out of the drain that goes down to the sea, and they crossed the floor, and they stopped, both feet set together, directly beneath my hanging shirt, as if someone had climbed up quietly while I stood folding my mother's gown, and crossed the room, and stood there a while under my uniform, looking up at it, and then had not walked away. There were no prints leading back to the drain. Whatever came up was still in the room with me, or had never needed to leave the way it came. The cuffs were damp, both sleeves to the elbow, dark with water, the way they'd been when I pulled my mother back out of the sea. I touched it, cold, ocean cold. And I brought the sleeve to my face, the way I'd brought that first shirt up on my 9th night, a year and a lifetime ago, and I already knew what it would smell like before I did it. It smelled like the lake. Not the sea, the lake, my lake, the one in southern Missouri, the flat, bright water where I was 15 and Danny was 8, and I looked away for 1 second. That exact water. The water doesn't usually make mistakes about which shore it shows you. It was showing me mine. I wrung the shirt out that night in the stairwell. I answered. The water learned my name a year ago when I reached in and pulled my mother loose, and it made the trade it makes, and it's a patient thing. The sea, it has all the time there is. It let me have my 11 days, and my clean goodbye, and my dry folded proof that mercy is real, and then it hung my own uniform up to soak, quiet, on the hook by the table, to let me know I still work the overnight shift. I don't know why I do, except that someone has to hold the book, and someone has to cold wash the wet ones so they don't warm, and someone has to be down there when a stranger's shirt comes down the chute at 2 in the morning, so that at least one person in the building knows where the dying go, and that there's a shore, and that there's a shore. And I'll be honest with you, at the end here, because I've been honest the whole way, and I'm not going to stop now. My cuffs are damp most nights lately. It's getting worse. Last week I got sand in my own pocket. A small handful of pale wet sand I didn't put there. Sand from a lake in southern Missouri that has no business under a hospital in St. Louis. I went to log it. I opened the green book to the next clean line, the way I've done 1,000 times, and the line wasn't clean. Someone had already filled it in. In the column where the room number goes, there was no room number. There were 2 words, laundry room. And beside it, in the column where the name of a kept one goes, the column where I once found Carolyn Gill's torn, pressed hand, there was a name, my name. The name I told you at the very start didn't matter. The name I never once gave you across this whole confession because I have spent my entire life trying to be nobody, trying to disappear off every dock I ever stood on. It was written there in the book, plain as any other entry, and the date beside it was today's date. And the little cross was already drawn next to it, small and neat, the ink still faintly wet when I touched it. It's my handwriting. I've held it up against 40 years of the other entries 100 times since that night. There is no question. It is my own hand, my own loops, the way I cross my 7s. I don't remember writing it. I can't tell you whether I've written it yet. I'm not afraid, though. That's the part I can't explain to anyone up in the dry world. I stood at the edge of that water once already, and I chose to come back, and I'd choose it again. I'd choose my mother's 11 days again every single time. But I'm tired. I've been tired for a very long time, and the water isn't cruel. I know that now. I've seen it. The water is just patient, and it keeps what's already leaving, and it's had my name written in cold sleeves for a year now. Danny's down there still, I think, or maybe he's up in the warm with our mother. I go back and forth. But some nights when I stand by the drain and get very quiet under the hum of the machines, I can hear the surf coming up the stairs, that long draw and hush against the shore, and it doesn't sound like a warning anymore. It sounds like someone waiting for me to finally stop looking away and come down and be carried and rest.